I fell down the stairs and hit my head hard. The doctor said I might have temporary amnesia and memory issues. When I woke up, I decided to test my wife Blair by pretending I couldn't remember who she was. What happened next shattered everything. I thought I knew about my marriage. Instead of crying or showing concern, she looked relieved. She told me we were having marriage problems, and that maybe this was a fresh start for both of us. Within hours, I discovered she'd been planning to leave me for my best friend James. They'd been having an affair for months while I was working night shifts to pay off our debts, but Blair had no idea I was faking the amnesia. She had no idea I could hear every betraying word, and she definitely had no idea who I really was beneath the struggling husband facade. She thought she knew. This is the story of how my wife's betrayal during my amnesia revealed the truth about everything and everyone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The throbbing in my skull felt like someone was using a jackhammer inside my brain. I opened my eyes slowly, squinting against the harsh fluorescent lights of North Point General Hospital. The antiseptic smell hit me immediately, followed by the steady beeping of monitors attached to my body. Vance, oh thank God you're awake. Blair's voice came from somewhere to my left, but there was something off about her tone. Relief, yes, but not the desperate. Loving relief you'd expect from a wife whose husband just survived a serious accident. The memories came flooding back in pieces. The loose wooden step on our back porch staircase that I'd been meaning to fix for weeks. The sickening crack as it gave way under my weight. The sensation of falling backward, my head striking the concrete patio with a nauseating thud. Nothing but darkness. But I remembered everything clearly now. Too clearly, as I turned my head toward Blair's voice, a wild idea suddenly struck me. The doctor had mentioned potential memory issues to her while they thought I was unconscious. What if I tested her? What if I pretended not to remember her and saw how she reacted? Maybe it was the head injury making me paranoid, or maybe it was the 6 months of growing distance between us that had been eating at me. Either way, I decided to find out exactly who Blair Finch really was. When she thought I couldn't remember our 7 years together, I blinked several times, trying to look confused and disoriented. I'm sorry, I said slowly, my voice deliberately, weak and uncertain. Do I know you? The reaction I expected was tears, panic, desperate attempts to help me remember our wedding day. Our first apartment, the way we used to stay up all night talking about our dreams. What I got instead made my blood run cold. Blair's eyes widened, but not with the devastation of a loving wife. Instead, I caught something that looked almost like relief. She sat back in the hospital chair, and I could have sworn I saw her. Shoulders relax. Oh, Vance, she said, but her voice carried a strange lightness. The doctor said this might happen. You hit your head pretty hard. She paused, glancing toward the door as if making sure no one was listening. That's when she looked back at me. There was something calculating in her expression that I'd never seen before. We're married, she said carefully, as if testing the words. But Vance, I need to be honest with you. We've been having problems. Serious problems. Felt like she'd punched me in the stomach. Problems. What problems? Sure, we'd been stressed about money lately. I'd been working double shifts at the Westbridge construction site, coming home exhausted and covered in dirt. Blair had been distant, spending more time on her phone, going out with friends more often. But problems serious enough to bring up to her supposedly amnesiac husband? Problems? I managed to whisper, maintaining my confused act. Blair leaned forward, and for a moment I thought she was going to take my hand. Instead, she clasped her own hands together in her lap, as if she was restraining herself from showing too much affection. We've grown apart, Vance. You work all the time, and when you're home, you're too tired to really connect. I've been thinking that maybe we rushed into marriage too young. Maybe we want different things now. Each word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Here I was, lying in a hospital bed with a legitimate head injury, and instead of comfort or love, I was getting a relationship evaluation. But the worst part was the tone of her voice. She wasn't heartbroken about our alleged problems. she sounded, almost ... hopeful. The doctor says your memory might come back gradually, she continued, avoiding my eyes. But maybe this could be a fresh start for both of us. It's a chance to figure out what we really want without the pressure of trying. To fix something that might already be broken. I stared at her in stunned silence. A fresh start. She's seriously suggesting that my memory loss was some kind of convenient opportunity to reevaluate our marriage? I don't understand, I said, letting genuine confusion creep into my voice. Are you saying you don't want to help me remember? Don't you want me to remember us? Blair's face flushed slightly, and she looked genuinely uncomfortable for the first time since I'd woken up. Of course, I want you to recover, Vance. I just think maybe we shouldn't put pressure on ourselves to force things back to exactly how they were. Maybe we should take this slow and see what feels right. The way she said "take this slow" made it sound like she was talking to a stranger she was considering dating. Not her husband of 7 years who was lying in a hospital bed. A soft knock on the door interrupted my spiral of disbelief. Sorry. To interrupt, a nurse said, stepping into the room. Mr. Evans, how are you feeling? Any nausea, dizziness, or confusion? Just confused about some things, I said truthfully, though not in the way she meant. The nurse checked my chart and adjusted something on one of the machines. The doctor will want to run a few more tests before we consider discharge, but your vital signs look good. You're very lucky. Head injuries can be unpredictable. After she left, Blair stood up and smoothed down her dress. I should let you rest, she said. I'll come back tomorrow to check on you. She moved toward the door without kissing me goodbye, without even touching my hand. But then she paused and turned back, Vance. I want you to know that whatever happens with your memory, I'll always care about you. But maybe this is the universe, giving us both a chance to be honest about what we really want. And with that devastating statement, she walked out of my hospital room, leaving me alone with the crushing realization that the woman I'd been breaking my back to provide for, the woman I'd married believing she was my soulmate, saw my potential. Amnesia as a convenient escape route from our marriage. As the door closed behind her, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how long she'd been feeling this way. How long had she been looking for an exit? More importantly, what else was she hiding that I was about to discover? The head injury was real, but my memory was perfectly intact. Blair had no idea that I would remember every single word she'd just said. Every cold, calculating syllable that revealed exactly what our marriage meant to her. Nothing lying in that hospital bed. Staring at the ceiling tiles, I couldn't help but think about how different things used to be. 7 years ago, Blair Finch was the girl who made my heart skip every time she walked into a room. We met at a community college photography class. I was there trying to fulfill an art credit. She was pursuing her associate degree in digital media. I still remember the first time I saw her. She was adjusting the lighting for a portrait assignment, completely absorbed in getting the shadows just right on her subject's face. Her concentration was so intense, so passionate, that I found myself watching her work instead of focusing on my own project. When she finally looked up and caught me staring instead of being annoyed, she smiled and asked if I wanted to see what she was creating. That smile changed everything. We spent the next 3 months inseparable. Blair was ambitious then, full of dreams about starting her own photography business, maybe doing wedding shoots or fashion work. I was working construction during the day and taking night classes, determined to eventually start my own contracting company. We'd stay up until 2 a.m. in her tiny apartment, planning our futures together, talking about the house we'd buy, the life we'd build. When I proposed to her 2 years later with a ring that cost me 3 months of savings, she cried and said yes. Before I even finished asking the question, our wedding was small but perfect, held in the community center where we'd first met. With photos taken by her best friend from photography class, Blair wore a simple white dress that she'd found at a consignment shop, but to me, she looked like a goddess. The first 3 years of marriage were golden. We rented a small house on Maple Street in the older part of town, the kitchen barely big enough for one person, and a living room where we had to move the coffee table if we wanted to dance. But we danced anyway, almost every Sunday morning. To whatever song came on the radio while we made pancakes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Blair got a job at Sterling Photography Studio downtown, starting as an assistant but quickly working her way up to shooting smaller events. I was building my reputation in construction, learning everything I could about the business side of things. We had a 5-year plan: save enough for a down payment on a real house, start my contracting business, and help Blair launch her own photography studio. We were a team. When I came home covered in sawdust and paint, Blair would have dinner waiting and stories about her day to share. When she was stressed about a difficult client or a photo shoot that didn't go as planned, I'd listen for hours, offering solutions or just holding her while she vented. We supported each other's dreams because we saw them as shared dreams. But somewhere around year 4, things started to shift. It began with small changes that I initially attributed to normal relationship evolution. Blair stopped asking as many questions about my workday. She'd be on her phone more during dinner, scrolling through social media, or texting with friends from the studio. The Sunday morning dancing gradually stopped, placed by Blair sleeping in later and later, claiming she was exhausted from her increasingly demanding job. The real change started 8 months ago. When James Reed came back to town, James had been my best friend since high school. But he'd moved to Chicago right after graduation to pursue some vague dreams of making it big in business. We'd stayed in touch sporadically over the years, the occasional text message, a phone call on birthdays, that sort of thing. Blair had met him a few times when we were dating, and while they were friendly, they'd never been particularly close. But James returned to our town different. Successful. He was wearing expensive suits, driving a BMW, and talking about the marketing firm he'd started that was apparently doing very well. He rented a luxury apartment in the new high-rise downtown and immediately started throwing parties, trying to reconnect with old friends and establish himself in the local business community at first. I was genuinely happy to have my old friend back. Blair and I went to a few of his gatherings, and I enjoyed catching up and hearing about his adventures in the big city. James was charming, confident, and generous, always picking up the tab at dinner, always having stories about interesting clients and exotic business trips. But I started noticing how Blair would light up around him in a way she hadn't around me in months. She'd laugh louder at his jokes, dress a little nicer when we were going to see him, ask me more questions about his business than she'd asked about mine in years. The real warning sign came 3 months ago when James mentioned he was looking for someone to do marketing and social media for his firm. Blair's photography had evolved to include more commercial work, and she'd gotten good at social media promotion for the studio. Should freelance for James, I suggested innocently. One evening, after he'd mentioned the opportunity, it could be good experience and extra money. The way Blair's eyes lit up should have been my first clue. "Do you really think he'd be interested?" she asked. But there was something in her tone that made it sound like they'd already discussed it. Within a week, Blair was spending 2 evenings a week at James's apartment, working on marketing strategies and brand development. She'd come home late, full of energy and excitement about the projects they were working on, the ideas they'd generated, the potential for her to expand her skills. I was proud of her ambition, but something felt off. When I'd ask specific questions about the work, her answers were vague. When I suggested maybe I could meet them for dinner, one of those work nights, she'd brush it off, saying they were too focused to socialize. Then came the phone calls. James would call at odd hours, and Blair would step outside or into another room to talk. When I'd ask what he needed, she'd say it was just business stuff, nothing important. But those calls started happening more and more frequently, sometimes lasting an hour or more. The final straw was last month when I came home early from a job that had finished ahead of schedule. Blair's car was gone, but she'd told me she was working at home that day. When I called her, she sounded flustered and said she'd had to run an errand. But when I checked our credit card statement later, there was a charge from an upscale restaurant downtown at exactly the time she claimed to be running errands. I didn't confront her about it. Maybe I should have, but part of me was afraid of what I'd discover. Instead, I started paying closer attention, and the pattern became undeniable. Blair was pulling away from me and gravitating toward James with an intensity that made my stomach churn. She stopped talking about our 5-year plan. She stopped asking about my day. She stopped initiating any physical affection, and when I tried to kiss her or hold her, she'd tolerate it but not reciprocate. It was like living with a roommate who was just marking time until something better came along. The cruel irony was that I'd been working longer hours than ever, taking on extra shifts and weekend projects to save money for the house we'd planned to buy. I was literally breaking my back to build the future we'd dreamed of together, while she was apparently planning a different future entirely. Now, lying in this hospital bed, I realized that Blair's reaction to my supposed amnesia wasn't surprising at all. She'd been looking for an exit strategy for months. My memory loss was just a convenient excuse to make it official. But what she didn't know was that I remembered everything. Every distant conversation, every late-night phone call with James, every lie about where she'd been. And now I was going to find out exactly how deep this betrayal went. As I closed my eyes and pretended to sleep, I made a decision. Blair wanted to use my amnesia as an opportunity to show her true colors. I was going to let her. But she had no idea that every word, every action, every betrayal would be recorded in my perfectly functioning memory. She thought she was dealing with a confused, helpless victim. She had no idea she was about to reveal herself to someone who would remember everything. I was discharged from North Point General 3 days later with a clean bill of health. Despite my continued performance of memory confusion, the doctor's final instructions were simple: rest, avoid strenuous activity, and follow up if any symptoms worsened. Blair sat through the entire discharge conversation with the demeanor of someone discussing the NCU, whether rather than her husband's recovery. The ride home was uncomfortably quiet. Blair drove while I sat in the passenger seat, occasionally asking innocent questions about our neighborhood, our house, our life together. Each question was met with increasingly brief responses, as if she was already mentally preparing herself for our separation. "That's where we live," she said simply as we pulled into the driveway of our small house on Maple Street. She didn't say, "our home," or "where we've been happy," just a clinical identification of a building. As we walked through the front door, I made a show of looking around with confusion and mild interest. "It's nice," I said, as if seeing it for the first time. "Have we lived here long?" "For years," Blair replied, setting her purse on the kitchen counter. We bought it together," the correction was telling. She'd already started thinking of our shared life in the past tense. What happened next destroyed any remaining shred of hope I might have harbored about salvaging our marriage. Blair's phone buzzed with a text message, and the smile that spread across her face when she read it was brighter than any expression she'd shown me in months. Without thinking, she started typing a response, completely absorbed in the conversation happening on her screen. "Who's that?" I asked, playing the role of a confused husband, trying to understand his life. Blair looked up, startled, as if she'd forgotten I was in the room. "Oh, it's just a friend from work, about a project." But then her phone rang, and I saw the name James R. flash across the screen. "I should take this," she said. But instead of stepping into another room like she usually did, she answered right in front of me. After all, in her mind, I had no memory of James, or the significance of his calls. "Hey, James," she said, her voice immediately becoming warmer and more animated than it had been all day. "Yeah, I just got home from the hospital. No, he's okay." But ... she paused, glancing at me. I was pretending to examine family photos on the mantel, acting disoriented and harmless. "Actually, can I call you back in a few minutes? I need to get him settled." After she hung up, she turned to me with what she probably thought was a caring expression. "Vance, you must be exhausted. Why don't you rest while I make some phone calls about work stuff?" I nodded obediently. "That sounds good. I'm pretty tired." Blair helped me to the couch, arranged pillows behind my head, and even brought me a glass of water. The attentiveness might have been touching if I didn't know it was motivated by guilt and the desire to get rid of me, so she could talk to James freely. "I'll just be in the kitchen," she said. "Try to sleep." I closed my eyes and regulated my breathing to mimic someone drifting off, but my hearing was perfectly sharp. Blair waited exactly 3 minutes before calling James back. "Okay, I can talk now," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "He's sleeping." What I heard next made my blood run cold. James, I think this might actually be a blessing in disguise, Blair continued. I know that sounds terrible, but hear me out. The doctor said his memory might come back gradually, but there's no guarantee it'll come back completely. She paused, listening to whatever James was saying on the other end. No, I don't think he suspects anything about us. When I told him we were having marriage problems, he seemed confused but not angry. It's like I'm talking to a stranger who happens to look like my husband. Another pause. My hands were clenched so tightly that my knuckles had gone white. The thing is, this gives me a chance to be honest without having to deal with all the baggage and guilt. If he can't remember the last 7 years, then I don't have to pretend to be the same person I was 7 years ago. I can just ... start. Over, I had to bite my lip to keep from gasping audibly. Blair was essentially discussing how my amnesia was liberating her from having to maintain the pretense of loving me. I've already told him we've been having problems, she continued. Tomorrow, I'm going to suggest that maybe we should separate while he recovers. Give him space to figure out who he is without the pressure of trying to rebuild a marriage he can't remember. The casual way she was dismantling our 7-year relationship while I lay 10 feet away was breathtaking in its cruelty, of course. I want to be with you, James. You know that. I've wanted that for months. But I didn't know how to end things with Vance without destroying him, this ... This makes it easier for everyone. I could hear James saying something that made Blair laugh. Softly. You're right. It is perfect timing. And yes, I'll tell him about the job offer in Phoenix soon. If he thinks it's his idea to take a fresh start in a new city, he won't question why I'm not coming with him. Job offer in Phoenix? What job offer? This was the first I'd heard of any opportunity in Phoenix, but apparently Blair and James had already discussed relocating me across the country to get me out of their way. I love you too, Blair whispered into the phone. I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore. After she hung up, I heard her moving around the kitchen, humming quietly to herself. She was humming, the woman who had just spent 10 minutes discussing how to strategically abandon her brain-injured husband was humming like she didn't have a care in the world. I lay on that couch, eyes closed, heart pounding, trying to process the enormity of what I'd just overheard. Blair hadn't just been having an affair. She'd been actively planning my removal from her life for months. The amnesia was simply the excuse she needed to execute her plan without looking like the villain. 20 minutes later, she gently shook my shoulder. Vance, I made some soup. You should eat something. I opened my eyes and smiled at her, the same trusting, confused smile I'd been wearing since the hospital. That's very kind of you. As we sat at the kitchen table, the same table, where we'd planned our future together years ago, Blair started her campaign to convince me that separation was in my best interest. I've been thinking, she said carefully, stirring her soup without eating it. Maybe it would be good for you to have some space while you recover. No pressure to remember things or try to force feelings that might not come back naturally. Tilted my head, as if considering this for the first time. You mean live separately? Just temporarily? She said quickly. There's actually an opportunity that might be perfect for you. A friend mentioned there are good construction jobs in Phoenix, Arizona. Fresh start, new environment, might help with your recovery. Phoenix, it's just like she discussed with James 20 minutes ago. Would you come with me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Blair's face showed a flicker of what might have been genuine sadness, but it passed quickly. I don't think that would be best for either of us right now. You need to figure out who you are without any influences from your past, and I need to figure out what I want to. What she wanted was my best friend, my house, and my absence. But she was packaging it as therapeutic separation for my own good. I see, I said slowly. When would this happen? We don't have to decide anything right now, Blair said, reaching across the table to pat my hand, the first physical contact she'd initiated since the hospital. Just think about it. No pressure. But there was pressure, and we both knew it. Blair had already made her decision. She was just waiting for me to agree to my own exile so she could maintain the illusion that it was mutual. As we finished our soup in silence, I realized that the woman sitting across from me was a complete stranger. 7 years of marriage, and I'd never really known Blair Finch at all. The caring, ambitious, loving partner I thought I'd married was a carefully constructed facade, hiding someone who could plan the destruction of her husband's life while humming cheerfully in the kitchen. But she had no idea that her amnesiac husband was recording every word, every betrayal, every calculated move in his perfectly functioning memory. Blair thought she was managing a confused, helpless victim. She had no idea what was coming. The next few days fell into a disturbing routine. Blair would leave for work each morning with barely a goodbye, spend her evenings working late with James, and return home to find me exactly where she'd left me, sitting on the couch, looking confused and helpless, struggling with basic tasks, like making coffee or finding the TV remote. Of course, none of my confusion was real. The moment Blair's car pulled out of the driveway, I'd transform back into myself, using the time to think, plan, and most importantly, investigate exactly what Blair and James had been up to behind my back. It was during one of these investigative sessions that I made a discovery that changed everything. While Blair was out at another marketing meeting with James, I decided to go through our financial documents. I'd always handled our taxes and major financial decisions, but Blair had taken over the day-to-day bill paying about 6 months ago, claiming she wanted to help reduce my stress. Now I understood why. Sitting at our kitchen table with bank statements spread before me, I stared at evidence of a systematic financial betrayal that made the emotional affair seem almost quaint by comparison. Over the past 4 months, Blair had been slowly draining our joint savings account, the one we'd been building toward our house down payment. The withdrawals were clever. $800 here, $1,200 there, amounts large enough to add up, but small enough to avoid triggering any automatic alerts. Each withdrawal had been labeled with vague descriptions like home improvement, medical expenses, or car repair. But I knew where that money had really gone. Blair had been funding her new life with James while methodically dismantling the financial foundation of our marriage. The final insult was a withdrawal from just 2 days ago, the day after my accident, for $3,500 labeled emergency medical, except our insurance had covered the hospital bills. Blair had used my head injury as cover to steal another chunk of our savings. I was still processing this financial betrayal when I heard Blair's car in the driveway, returning earlier than expected. I quickly stuffed the bank statements back into the filing cabinet and resumed my position on the couch, the picture of confusion and dependence. But this time, Blair wasn't alone. The front door opened, and I heard 2 sets of footsteps enter our house. Blair's voice carried a note of nervous excitement as she called out, "Vance, I brought someone to meet you." James Reed walked into our living room like he owned the place, all confident smiles and expensive cologne. He'd changed since high school. Broader shoulders, designer clothes, the unmistakable aura of someone who'd made money and wanted everyone to know it. But his eyes still held the same calculating intelligence that had made him both magnetic and dangerous even as a teenager. "Vance, buddy," James said with enthusiasm that seemed genuine until you looked closely at his eyes. "Blair told me about your accident, man. I'm so sorry. How are you feeling?" I blinked at him with carefully manufactured confusion. I'm sorry, have we met?" The look that passed between Blair and James was electric with barely contained excitement. They were both practically vibrating with the thrill of their deception. "This is James," Blair said, her voice carrying that same warmth she'd been using on the phone. "He's an old friend. We've been talking about him visiting to see if it might help with your memory. An old friend, not your best friend, since high school or the guy who was best man at our wedding. Just an old friend." James settled into our armchair, my armchair, where I'd spent countless evenings reading or watching TV, and leaned forward with what he probably thought was a caring expression. "Blair told me you're having some trouble with memory," he said. "That must be really scary, not remembering people or places that used to be important to you." The way he emphasized "used to be" made my skin crawl. Even in this supposedly innocent conversation, James couldn't resist twisting the knife. "It is confusing," I agreed, playing along. "Blair says we've been having problems in our marriage, but I can't remember what those problems were." Smile widened. "Well, sometimes a fresh start is exactly what someone needs. Blair mentioned there might be some great opportunities for you in Phoenix. Phoenix again." But now James was delivering the message personally, and his tone carried an undertone that hadn't been there when Blair suggested it. This wasn't a gentle suggestion anymore. This was the beginning of a coordinated campaign too. Pressure me into leaving. Phoenix sounds nice, I said slowly, but I don't know anyone there. That's exactly the point, James said, his voice becoming more animated. New city, new life, new opportunities. Sometimes when you can't remember your past, the best thing to do is create a completely different future. The audacity was breathtaking. Here was the man who'd been sleeping with my wife, sitting in my chair in my house, enthusiastically recommending that I abandon my entire life so he could step into it more comfortably. Blair was watching this exchange with barely concealed satisfaction. James has some connections in the construction industry in Phoenix, she said. Thinks he could help you get established there. That's very generous, I said, looking directly at James. Why would you do that for someone you barely know? Question caught him off guard for just a moment. I saw a flicker of something, irritation maybe, or surprise that I'd asked such a direct question. But he recovered quickly. Blair and I have become close friends while she's been helping with my marketing work, he said. Anyone important to Blair is important to me. Important to Blair. Past tense, as if I were already a memory rather than a living, breathing person sitting 3 feet away from him. Besides, James continued, his confidence growing, I've been thinking about expanding my business to Phoenix anyway. Could be a win-win situation. Now we were getting to the real plan. James wasn't just trying to get me out of town. He was planning to relocate his own business here, taking over not just my wife, but my entire geographic area. That's quite a coincidence, I said. You both independently thinking about Phoenix at the same time? Blair's face flushed slightly, but James just laughed. Great minds think alike, I guess. Over the next hour, James and Blair took turns painting an increasingly detailed picture of my supposed future in Arizona. James had researched construction companies that were hiring. Blair had looked into apartments that might be suitable for someone starting over. They had answers for every practical question and solutions for every concern I raised. The whole presentation had the feel of a sales pitch, except they were selling me on abandoning my own life. But the most disturbing part wasn't the manipulation itself. It was how much they were enjoying it. James kept making little jokes about my memory loss, testing how far he could push the boundaries of good taste. Blair would laugh at these jokes, encouraging him to go further. At least if you forget something in Phoenix, you can just blame it on the head injury, James said with a grin. It's built-in excuse for everything. It's terrible, Blair said, but she was smiling. You can't say things like that. Come on, if you can't joke about amnesia with an amnesiac, when can you joke about it? James replied. They were having fun with my supposed disability. They were treating my brain injury like entertainment, secure, in the knowledge that I wouldn't remember their cruelty anyway. But I remembered everything. Every smirk, every meaningful glance between them, every casual cruelty disguised as concern. And I was beginning to understand that Blair and James weren't just having an affair, they were actively enjoying the process of destroying me. As the evening wore on, their confidence grew. James started asking more personal questions about my memory gaps, probing to see exactly how much I supposedly remembered. Blair began making increasingly transparent references to our marital problems, painting a picture of a relationship that had been doomed long before my accident, by the time James finally left. The message was crystal clear. I was expected to agree to the Phoenix plan soon, and any resistance would be met with increased pressure. After James's BMW pulled out of our driveway, Blair turned to me with an expression of manufactured concern. So what did you think of James? She asked. He seems really willing to help, doesn't he? He seems very confident, I said carefully. He's successful, Blair said, and there was pride in her voice that she'd never used when talking about my accomplishments. James knows how to get things done. If he says he can help you get established in Phoenix, I believe him. And you really think I should go? Blair sat down next to me on the couch, closer than she'd sat since the hospital. Vance, I think it could be exactly what you need. A chance to build something new without being weighed down by a past you can't even remember. She was sitting close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same scent she'd worn on our wedding day. but now it just smelled like betrayal. "What about us?" I asked. "What about our marriage?" Blair's face showed what might have been genuine sadness, but her words revealed the truth. "Maybe sometimes love means letting someone go find their own path, even if it's painful." She was setting me free. How generous. But Blair had no idea that I knew exactly what path she thought I should find. A path that led 1,200 miles away from her new life with James. She had no idea that I'd seen the bank statements, overheard the phone calls, and witnessed the casual cruelty of their planning. Most importantly, she had no idea that the confused, helpless victim they'd been manipulating was actually someone who remembered everything, including things about himself that even Blair had never known. Things that were about to change the entire dynamic of this sick little game they thought they were winning. The revelation came 3 days later. But not in the way Blair and James expected. That morning, watched from our bedroom window as Blair met James in our driveway for what they thought was a discreet conversation. They were probably discussing timeline details for my departure to Phoenix. Maybe celebrating how smoothly their plan was progressing. What they didn't know was that my recovery was about to take an unexpected turn. I walked downstairs and found Blair in the kitchen, practically glowing with excitement she was trying to hide. "Good morning," she said with false cheer. "Actually, I'm feeling much clearer," I said, watching her face carefully. "Like some of. My memory is starting to come back." Blair's smile faltered for just a moment. "Oh, that's wonderful. What kinds of things are you remembering?" "Bits and pieces," I said casually. "I remember that we were supposed to buy a house. Something about savings we had built up." Together, Blair's face went pale. "Your memory might not be completely accurate, Vance." The doctor said, "I also remember that I'm not actually a construction worker." I continued, watching her world begin to crumble. "That was just my cover while I was working undercover." The coffee mug slipped from Blair's hands and shattered on our kitchen floor, but neither of us moved to clean it up. "Cover?" she whispered. I pulled out my phone and made a call that would change everything. "This is Agent Evans. I need to speak with Director Hamilton immediately." Blair stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "Agent Vance, what are you talking about?" "Blair," I said calmly. "Meet Special Agent Vance Evans, FBI Financial Crimes Division. For the past 2 years, I've been investigating a money laundering operation running through construction companies in this region." The irony was beautiful. While Blair thought she was married to a struggling construction worker, she'd actually been married to a federal agent whose job was investigating financial crimes. The same types of crimes she'd been committing by stealing from our joint account. "The accident interrupted my investigation," I continued, "but my memory is perfectly fine. I remember everything, Blair. Every phone call with James, every dollar. You stole every lie you told while planning my exile to Phoenix." Blair sank into a chair, her face ashen. "You're lying. You can't be FBI. You work construction. You've seen my cover identity," I said. "The job I took to blend in while investigating financial crimes in the construction industry, the same industry your boyfriend James has been using to launder money through his marketing firm." The front door opened, and James walked in without knocking, as had become his habit. "Blair, I was thinking we should." He stopped dead when he saw my expression. "James," I said pleasantly. "Perfect timing. I was just explaining to my wife that I'm a federal agent, and I've been investigating your money laundering operation." For the past 18 months, James went white as a sheet. "The irony is incredible," I continued. "Blair threw away her marriage to an FBI agent to be with a man we've been building a case against. You couldn't have made this easier for us if you'd tried. Your arrest warrants came through within 48 hours. I stood in our kitchen, the same kitchen where Blair had planned my exile to Phoenix, watching as 2 federal agents placed handcuffs on James Reed. His marketing firm had been laundering money for 3 different criminal organizations, routing dirty cash through fake construction contracts and real estate deals. Blair wasn't arrested that day, right, but she'd been charged with theft and conspiracy related to the stolen funds from our joint account. The money she thought she was taking from a construction worker was actually evidence in a federal investigation, Vance Blair said, as the agents led James past her. Her voice was small, broken. I need to understand. How long have you been FBI? You've been FBI. Since before we met, I said simply. The community college photography class, our entire relationship, I was already undercover. You were never part of the investigation, Blair. You were supposed to be my normal life. The word supposed hung between us like a death sentence. When I married you, I thought I'd found someone who loved me for who I was beneath all the secrecy, I continued. Someone I could eventually tell the truth to. Instead, I found someone who couldn't even love, the fake version of me. James turned back as they reached the door, his face twisted with rage. You set us up. This whole amnesia thing was a lie. No, James, I corrected. The head injury was real. The amnesia was fake. But your crimes? Those were very real, and they're going to put you away for a long time. After they took James away, Blair and I sat in the living room, where just days earlier she'd been planning my exile. The silence stretched between us until she finally spoke. You're going to testify against me? I already have, I said. Theft of our joint savings? The financial planning for your new life with James? It's all documented evidence now. Blair laughed bitterly. So, while I was stealing from you, I was actually stealing from the FBI. You were stealing from your husband, I corrected. The fact that your husband happened to be a federal agent just made it a federal crime instead of a civil matter. She looked around our small house, the house where we'd danced on Sunday mornings, where we'd planned our future, where she'd systematically betrayed everything we'd built together. What happens now? She asked. You'll probably get a plea deal, I said. Cooperate with the investigation, serve minimal time, start over somewhere new, which is what you wanted anyway, isn't it? Blair winced. Vance, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I am sorry. I studied her face, looking for any trace of the woman I'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. Are you sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught? She was quiet for a long time. I don't know, she finally admitted. That honesty, at least, was real. 6 months later, I received a letter from Blair. She'd pled guilty and received 2 years probation in exchange for her testimony against James, who got 15 years for money laundering. She was living in Seattle, working at a photography studio, starting over just like she'd always wanted. The letter was an apology, but it was also an explanation. She wrote about feeling trapped in a life that seemed too small, about being married to someone she thought had no ambition, about wanting more than what appeared to be a dead-end existence with a construction worker. I know now that the life I thought was too small was actually bigger than anything I could have imagined, she wrote. I threw away something real for something that was never real at all. I never wrote back. As for me, I finished the investigation. That had consumed 3 years of my life. The case became one of the FBI's biggest financial crimes busts, taking down a network that had laundered over $200 million through construction companies. Across 6 states, I requested a transfer back. 2 headquarters in Washington, leaving behind the small town where I'd lived undercover for so long. Sometimes I drive past the community college where Blair and I met, past the community center where we got married, past the house on Maple Street where our life together died. I learned something important during those 7 years with Blair, and especially during those final devastating weeks. You never really know someone until you see who they become when they think nobody is watching. Character isn't what people do when they're being observed. It's what they do when they believe there are no consequences. Blair thought she was manipulating a helpless victim with amnesia. Instead, she revealed exactly who she was to the one person who would remember everything forever. Sometimes the worst betrayals give you the most valuable gifts. Blair's betrayal gave me the gift of clarity about her, about myself, and about what real love actually looks like. Real love doesn't see amnesia as an opportunity to escape. Real love doesn't calculate the best path forward while your partner is sleeping 10 feet away. Real love doesn't treat brain injury as entertainment. Real love stays. Real love fights for what you've built together. Real love doesn't give up just because the person you married can't remember who they are. I'm still looking for that kind of love. But now I know exactly what it looks like. because I know exactly what it's not, and I'll never settle for less. Again, up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.